As football has become so much more methodical and structured, for better or worse, the responsibilities and capabilities of a manager or head coach have arguably never been more important. Man management, discipline, and motivation remain as paramount as ever, if not more so now that all footballers are supreme athletes, but very rarely now are they enough in of themselves. One could make the case, therefore, that the greatest managers of the 21st century are perhaps the greatest managers of all time. I wouldn't. I made a video on who I actually think are the greatest managers of all time 6 years ago, but, one could. That was the last installment of a series on the greatest footballers of all time, building up to an all-time 11, just as this is the last installment of a series on the greatest footballers since 2000, building up to a 21st century 11. With the goalkeepers, right-backs, centre-backs, left-backs, holding midfielders, central midfielders, attacking midfielders, right-wingers, left-wingers, and centre-forwards all done and dusted, it would be fair to say that we have assembled a star-studded cast. But who, I ask, out of the cavalcade of world-class managers to have graced the game over the last 24 years, is best placed to take charge of this side? As ever, the criteria is very simply the quality and quantity of their output since 2000. So Arrigo Sacchi, even though he technically managed during the 2000s and was an outstanding coach, would have a hard time getting in based upon just 3 games at Parma in 2001, with all of his work in the 80s and 90s being neglected. Fabio Capello might have a greater body of post-2000 work, but would still lose his finest years and accomplishments, most notably at AC Milan, and even Sir Alex Ferguson, despite having an outstanding post-2000 record, is stripped not only of his first 14 years at Manchester United, in which he turned the Red Devils into the best team in England and won the treble, but also the magnificent job that he did dethroning Celtic and Rangers and winning a European trophy with Aberdeen. Hopefully that all makes sense then, and now that I have explained the criteria, I'm sure that you will all be in total agreement with my inclusions and the order of them, and there will be 0 disapproving responses in the comments. Right? Without further ado then, who has made his first foray into coaching with the next level soccer youth team in Baltimore in recent years, but hasn't quite done enough just yet to feature, here are, in my view, the greatest managers since 2000. 7th, Diego Simeone. Diego Simeone is a manager unlike any other in this 7, and indeed, almost any other in the modern era, and I suppose that you could say that in both a positive and a negative sense. Simeone is unusual not just tactically, as a modern coach who has absolutely no reservations about rejecting the notion of control as it is typically understood by most of his peers, but also in terms of his managerial journey. Having had 6 different clubs during his first 5 years in management, winning trophies with both Estudiantes and River Plate, Simeone looks set to go down as one of the greatest managerial journeymen of the modern era. Instead, he has become extremely abnormal, especially in the modern era, by staying at a single club for the last 12 plus years and counting, shaping that club in his own image. There is no other elite club in Europe that has stuck with a single head coach over the past decade and beyond, but in many ways, Simeone and Atletico Madrid are a match made in heaven. For a start, Simeone spent 5 seasons with Atleti over 2 separate stints during his playing days, winning both La Liga and the Copa del Rey. In management, his pragmatism and revelry in the role of an underdog is ideally suited to a team that will always be considered, at best, the 3rd biggest club domestically, behind Real Madrid and Barcelona. Indeed, when Simeone returned to Madrid, Atletico were 10th, having only won 6 of their opening 18 matches that season, and they had been relegated to the Segunda Division, in 1999, more recently than they had finished in the top 3 in La Liga. The fact that they have finished in the top 3 in every single one of their last 11 seasons under Simeone, therefore, is a testament to the fine job that he has done. In addition to the consistency that he has overseen, cementing Atleti's status as one of La Liga's big 3 and as a member of Europe's elite, Simeone has also guided the club to 2 La Liga titles, 2 Europa Leagues, a Copa del Rey, and 2 UEFA Champions League finals, both of which ended in painful defeats against their city rivals. Given the budget Simeone has had in Madrid and the players that he has had to cope with leaving during that time, contrasted with the relentless consistency that he and Atletico have shown, and the trophies that they have won, in an era where such successful and long-term managerial marriages in football are practically non-existent, I think that Simeone has to feature in this 7, and one could argue that he is even unfortunate to only feature in 7th. 6th, Arsene Wenger. Diego Simeone and Arsene Wenger are simultaneously very different and quite similar managers in a certain sense. Unlike Simeone, Wenger was very preoccupied with the aesthetics of the game and was frequently criticised for being too much of a football purist, an accusation which could never be thrown at the Argentine. But like Simeone, particularly during his last 10, 12 or even 14 years at Arsenal, Wenger had to compete against teams with much larger budgets while repeatedly losing his best players, and he did an excellent job in those circumstances. It is worth noting, of course, that a massive 16 years of Wenger's CV is entirely discarded for the purposes of this 7, including his success at Monaco and his first 4 years at Arsenal, which included a memorable Premier League and FA Cup double in the 1997-98 season, disrupting what would otherwise have been a run of 6 straight Premier League titles for Manchester United and Alex Ferguson. The battle between Ferguson and Wenger, and Man United and Arsenal more broadly during this period, was the stuff of legend, and in the early 2000s, Arsene's Arsenal reached yet new heights. A second League and Cup double arrived in 2002, and in the 2003-04 season, of course, Arsenal went invincible. The only team to have done so during the Premier League era, and one of only 2, along with Preston North End, who managed it in the Football League's first ever season in 1888-89, to have done so during the entire history of English football's top flight. Though Wenger failed to win another Premier League title post-2004, during an additional 14 years in North London, the amount of money that Arsenal invested in the Emirates, at the expense of investment in players and wages, combined with the arrival of Roman Abramovich at Chelsea, and later the United Arab Emirates at Manchester City, made the likelihood of that happening very slim. Though Arsenal were mocked for it at the time, however, the fact that Wenger managed to retain Arsenal's top 4 and therefore Champions League status every season until his last 2 at the club was an outstanding achievement in those circumstances. Wenger features in this 7 and in 6th, not only because of his achievements though, but also because of his broader impact upon the game. The most revolutionary manager in the modern history of English football, more so even than Alex Ferguson I would contest, in terms of the way in which he changed the game, Wenger's focus on diet, training, professionalism and data rocked what was rapidly becoming the world's richest league. And where he went, everyone else followed. Admittedly, much of that was in the 90s when he first arrived, but his legacy continued well into the 2000s, which was also when he won the bulk of his trophies and pulled off his greatest achievements of all. So a spot in 6 for Wenger, who retired in 2018, feels about right to me. 5th, Jurgen Klopp. I've put Jurgen Klopp 5th in this 7, because that's where I think he deserves to be, but I'm about to make the case for why he should be top. Klopp's managerial journey began in February 2001, on the same day that he retired from playing the game, meaning that he has managed throughout almost the entirety of the 21st century, and during that time, I'm not really sure what more he could have done. The obvious answer, I suppose, is that he could have won more trophies. It's not as though he hasn't won anything, but certainly, the 4 men ahead of him in this 7 have all won more. None, however, have done what Klopp has done in terms of overachieving against teams with more resources on such a consistent basis with an almost flawless record. Klopp has only managed 3 different clubs in over 23 years, starting with 7 years at Mainz, followed by 7 years at Dortmund, and most recently Liverpool, who Klopp will leave behind in the summer, following almost 9 years in charge. Klopp inherited a Mainz team where he had spent the last decade playing either as a centre-back or centre-forward that was mired in a second Bundesliga relegation scrap. He won 6 out of his first 7 games in charge, as Mainz survived by 3 points. The following season, they finished 3rd, and in 2004, for the first time, they reached the Bundesliga. Mainz were relegated in 2007 following successive 11th place finishes in the top flight, but immediate promotion was enough to land Klopp the job at Borussia Dortmund, succeeding Thomas Doll after Dortmund had just finished 13th. It was 5 years since Dortmund's league finish had even qualified them for Europe, but in Klopp's first season, they climbed to 6th, then 5th, and in the 2010-11 season, they caused the upset of all upsets to dethrone Bayern Munich and lift the Bundesliga title. Klopp had assembled and developed an outstanding team, featuring the likes of Mats Hummels, Mario Götze, and Robert Lewandowski, and the following season, they only went and did it again, lifting the DFB Pokal this time as well to make it a double. At Liverpool, Klopp took charge of a team that had finished 6th the previous season and was 10th when he arrived midway through his debut campaign. In his first season, the Reds only climbed up to 8th, blighted by defensive errors, but they made it through to the final of both the Europa League and the League Cup. The following season, Liverpool finished 4th, and not until last season, when they finished 5th, would they miss out on Champions League football again. During that time, Liverpool have won the Premier League title and the Champions League, in addition to twice taking Man City to the death in a title race, and reaching 2 more Champions League finals, both of which they lost against Real Madrid, along with winning the FA Cup and a couple of League Cups. It's not quite a flawless record. There was a relegation at Mainz, on a tiny budget it should be said, one iffy season at Dortmund, and if you were being hypercritical, then last season at Liverpool. But overall, Klopp's mastery, without the biggest budget, and against some of the most formidable super clubs of the modern era, is pretty much second to none. 5th really was the lowest that he could possibly have finished. 4th, Alex Ferguson. I think Alex Ferguson is probably the best manager in this 7 and the best manager of all time. But of course, that's not the criteria of today's video. Restricting things solely to the 21st century, as this series does, and as I mentioned in the introduction, strips Sir Alex of some of his finest work, including promotion at St Mirren, 3 Scottish Premier Division titles, and a European Cup Winners' Cup against Real Madrid at Aberdeen, and the 14 years in which he established Manchester United as the best club in England and won a historic treble. That is exactly 2/3 of Ferguson's entire career in management and, if we are being honest, probably his most impressive accomplishments. One could argue, in isolation, that his trophies at Aberdeen, especially his European Cup Winners' Cup, was actually more impressive than any of his individual trophies at Manchester United. Indeed, I would argue just that. It speaks volumes that Ferguson even features in this 7, therefore, on only 33.3% of his resume, just 13 years of management, which is the least of anyone in this 7, and without some of his most special achievements. Nonetheless, in the 13 years post-2000 that Sir Alex managed in, he won some 19 trophies, including 8 Premier League titles, despite the rise of 2 financial superpowers during that time, in Chelsea and Man City, and a UEFA Champions League, which most likely would have been 2 or even 3, were it not for arguably the greatest club side of all time, beating him in 2 finals. I said Ferguson's greatest accomplishments in isolation may have come at Aberdeen, but what made him so unique was his longevity and his ability to refresh and rebuild a squad time and time again, maintaining standards, motivation, and most importantly, results. In that respect, the 2000s and early 2010s constituted peak Ferguson, as the likes of David Beckham, Roy Keane, Ruud van Nistelrooy and Cristiano Ronaldo all departed, yet Manchester United's standards never wavered. Between 2000 and 2013, and indeed throughout the entire Premier League era, Ferguson never finished lower than 3rd in the Premier League table, and he only finished that low twice. It is uncharted territory for him therefore, but on the balance of things, I think that 4th is about right in this 7. 3rd, Carlo Ancelotti. I can only assume that it's just an English thing, based upon the relentless brilliance of Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola on these shores in recent years, and the fact that Carlo Ancelotti has only managed here for about 3.5 years, with Chelsea and Everton, but I do find it unusual how often he is overlooked when it comes to discussions about the best managers in the world. That is a little bit strange given Ancelotti's experience, the size of his trophy cabinet, and the fact that he is the most successful manager in the history of both the Champions League and European competitions as a whole. In terms of this 7, only one of Ancelotti's 27 trophies in total fall outside of our remit, and that is quite possibly the least significant of them all, an Intertoto Cup with Juventus back in 1999. In 2001, Ancelotti landed the AC Milan job, and it was there that his extraordinary success in management began. Though the Rossoneri only won 1 Scudetto during Ancelotti's 7.5 seasons at the helm, they reached 3 Champions League finals, winning 2 of them, and in the one that they lost, they were 3-0 up at half-time. At Chelsea, Ancelotti won a Premier League and an FA Cup double in his debut campaign, but that still wasn't enough to keep him in the job after the Blues finished second, behind Manchester United, in his second season. Then came PSG, where Ancelotti won the club their first Ligue 1 title in almost 20 years, fueled of course by a fresh injection of Qatari state cash. Real Madrid followed, where Ancelotti won a 3rd Champions League, followed by 14 months at Bayern Munich, where Ancelotti inevitably won a Bundesliga title. Trophies were harder to come by at Napoli and Everton, also somewhat inevitably, though a second-place finish in Naples and 10th on Merseyside in his only full seasons at either club certainly weren't bad going by both teams' recent standards. And most recently, since 2021, Ancelotti has been back at Real Madrid, where he has won a La Liga title and yet another Champions League, and could yet win both again this season, with the first of those basically already being guaranteed. Ancelotti is a bit of a throwback in modern management, in the sense that he tends not to micromanage or be hyper-structured, providing a looser framework for his incredibly gifted players to go out and express themselves. Having been basically announced as the next Brazil boss at one stage, Ancelotti penned a new deal with Los Blancos in December, which will keep him in the Spanish capital until 2026. Second, Jose Mourinho. To say that he is still only 61 years old, which is hardly fossilised in managerial terms, or any terms I should add, for any sexagenarians who may be watching, it is fairly extraordinary the degree to which Jose Mourinho's stock has fallen, and not just over the last couple of seasons, but really over the last 8 or 9 years now. We'll come to that, because it probably stops Mourinho from taking top spot, but we'll start with why he still features in second. For a start, Mourinho's managerial career began at Benfica in the year 2000, meaning his entire career in management falls perfectly within our purview. So, that always helps. Next up, Mourinho was almost immediately successful, and immensely successful at that. In his first season at Porto, which was only a half season no less, he won a treble: the Portuguese Primeira Liga, the Taça de Portugal, and the UEFA Cup. The year that followed, he won the Primeira Liga title again and, in what remains his greatest achievement, in my view at least, the UEFA Champions League. In the summer of 2004, Mourinho's stock couldn't have been any higher, and Roman Abramovich chose him as the man to carry the Blues into a brave new era, aided, of course, by the most intense spending spree in the history of football up to that point. Investment helps, of course, a lot, but Chelsea hadn't won a top-flight league title since 1955, and that was the only one that they'd ever won. In Mourinho's debut campaign, however, they won their second, conceding only 15 goals in the process, followed by a third the following season, and then a League Cup and FA Cup double. Next up, Mourinho joined Inter Milan, where he won 5 trophies in 2 seasons, including 2 Scudettos and a Champions League, overcoming Pep's Barcelona in their prime in the semi-finals. That's probably what convinced Real Madrid that Mourinho was the man to compete with that Barcelona team, and Mourinho managed to win the 2011-12 La Liga title against them in Madrid. Back at Chelsea, Mourinho won a second double in the 2014-15 season, the Premier League and the League Cup, but it would be fair to say that it has been largely downhill from there for Jose. There have still been some high points, an EFL Cup and a Europa League double at Man United, and a Conference League at Roma, but it is 1 or 2 levels below where Mourinho once was. From untouchable at Porto and Inter to being sacked at Spurs and Roma is some come down, and in some ways, it's difficult to know where Mourinho goes next, or to have any faith, in fact, that he will return to the heights that he set between the beginning of the 2000s and the mid-2010s. Nonetheless, Mourinho's body of work over those 15, 16, or maybe 17 years, the relentlessness of his trophy winning, even since tailing off, including titles in the biggest competitions of them all during the 21st century, well, that is enough to earn him a silver medal in my book. 0. Honourable mentions. Just before we come to top spot, which I would imagine is quite predictable by this stage, but who knows, maybe you've all had a brain fart and are on tenterhooks, there is still time for the small matter of the honourable mentions. The likes of Luis Enrique, Louis van Gaal, Luciano Spalletti, Rafa Benitez, Massimo Allegri, Didier Deschamps, Luis Felipe Scolari, Ottmar Hitzfeld, Fabio Capello, Claudio Ranieri, Zinedine Zidane, Ernesto Valverde, Unai Emery, Marcello Lippi, Maurizio Pochettino, Vicente Del Bosque, Joachim Löw, and Jupp Heynckes all made my shortlist, among others. Meanwhile, the man who perhaps came closest to featuring was actually Antonio Conte. Conte won 3 straight Serie A titles with Juventus, comfortably won a Premier League title, followed by an FA Cup at Chelsea, and won another Serie A title in the 2020-21 season with Inter Milan. That's not enough to edge him past Diego Simeone in 7th, but it did earn him, along with 2 or 3 others, a little asterisk next to his name in my shortlist. And now, for your very predictable top spot. First, Alan Pardew. Yes, just as you all anticipated. The 2011-12 Premier League and LMA Manager of the Season, ahead of Arsene Wenger, Alex Ferguson and Roberto Mancini no less, Alan Pardew is a man who was so gifted as a coach that Mike Ashley once offered him an 8-year contract. Not just a great manager, but also a passionate dancer and MMA fan. Nah, I'm just kidding. First, Pep Guardiola. A man who is much less familiar with a headbutt or performing the cha-cha slide, despite having been to Wembley far more times than good old Al, Pep Guardiola has, nonetheless, some would argue, achieved more within the game. Guardiola got the top job at Barcelona after just a single season in charge of the Barca B team, and contrary to popular opinion, he didn't inherit some kind of all-conquering super team that were bound to win everything in the seasons that followed. In actual fact, Barca had finished 3rd the previous season, 18 points behind Real Madrid, and 10 points behind Villarreal. Of course, they still had some brilliant players, but Lionel Messi had only just turned 21, and though it was clear that he was a special talent, it wasn't necessarily a given that he would become one of the greatest players of all time. In Guardiola's first summer in charge, he took the controversial and bold decision to let go of fan favourites like Deco, and most notably Ronaldinho, who made way for young defenders like Dani Alves and Gerard Piqué. Pep's first season heralded a La Liga title, with Barcelona's second highest ever points tally, a huge turnaround from the previous season. Barca didn't just win the league though, they won their first ever European treble, and the following year, they lost just 1 game all season, amassing an enormous record-breaking 99 points. Another La Liga and Champions League double followed in 2010-11, before Guardiola took a 1-year sabbatical in New York. Back in the game with Bayern Munich, Guardiola won 3 Bundesliga titles in 3 seasons, with a ridiculous 75% win percentage in Bavaria, even higher than his success rate at Barca. Then came Manchester City in 2016, where Guardiola's debut campaign was the most challenging of his career, and by that, I mean he finished 3rd and didn't win anything. Since then, however, the citizens have been relentless. Over the last 6 seasons, Guardiola has won 5 Premier League titles, including a domestic quadruple, a record-breaking points tally of 100, and a European treble last season. Age 53, Guardiola is already the 4th most successful manager of all time in terms of trophies, only 14 behind the record holder Alex Ferguson, and by far the most successful since 2000. In fact, if there is one thing that counts against Guardiola, other than the argument that he has never taken a job at a club that wasn't already among the favourites to win everything, it is that his managerial journey began in the late 2000s, whereas Klopp, Mourinho and Ancelotti, for example, have all managed throughout basically the entirety of the millennium. Guardiola has more than made up for lost time though, not only maintaining a level of consistency and methodical success that is without peer, but also having a huge influence upon style, systems and, fundamentally, just the way in which the sport is played. Ultimately, whatever you think of the jobs Guardiola has, or perhaps more importantly hasn't taken, and whether he could be as effective with lesser players or a smaller budget, the reality is that it's almost impossible not to put him in top spot. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much as ever for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course, make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on, both for this channel, HITC Sevens, and also my second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might enjoy watching, including from this series, after this one. So, yeah. And you can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, or Threads via the username at HITC Sevens on all three, should you wish to do so. And all of those links plus a whole lot more should be down in the video description below. Cheers.